If I wake up and I'm like, I am just not where I need to be today to serve the person who's coming on, the old me would have really pushed myself too. And that's not to say I just up and cancel. I might do some self-care practices, some, yoga, meditation, whatever, to get myself in the mindset. But I have picked up the phone and said, hey, I am just not where I need to be to honor us communicating today. Can we reschedule? Is that at all possible? And 9 times out of 10, people respond with, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that. Another day would be better for me, which makes me glad that I trusted my niggle, because they weren't listening to their own, right? To call me up and say the same thing.
Hey there, I'm Onnie Michalsky, wellness coach, therapist, and mom to half a dozen amazing kiddos. This podcast is for moms who desperately need a break, but refuse to take one. You know who you are. You have a jam-packed schedule and you're so busy doing everything for everyone else, you don't leave any time for you. What's up with that? Well, no more. Take off your Superwoman cape and learn how to put yourself on your to-do list. This is the Moms Without Capes podcast. We have today with us Candice Smiley.
Thank you.
So Candice is the host of Create the Ripple podcast, a self-proclaimed master manifester and personal development junkie who loves to engage in interesting conversations with other influencers and entrepreneurs. Her favorite conversations are the ones that take courage to engage in. She spends her time living in a tiny home, 250 square feet, traveling with her daughter, speaking on her podcast and on stages, and sharing candidly with other women how to find love after betrayal, to trust themselves, to speak up for themselves, and to set powerful boundaries. So welcome, Candice, to the show.
Well, thank you so much. I am stoked. I absolutely love the name of your podcast. I saw it and I was like, oh, I want to meet a guest on the show. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. So I put the Moms Without Capes is all a play on words as we take off our Superwoman capes and learn to fall in love with the woman underneath. So we talk a lot about escaping the hustle culture instead of thinking that we have to do everything and be everything, and instead learn how to put ourselves on our to-do list. So thanks for being here. So I read your bio, but why don't we dive a little deeper and you tell us a bit more about yourself and how you got to be where you are today.
For sure. Well, I'm first and foremost a mom, and I just had little one at time of recording anyway, and he is about 2.5 weeks old. And a large part of the reason why I do what I do and why I speak so plainly and openly, in my story, which you've certainly seen, is because I really do feel like you're right. When we take off the cape and we stop trying to pretend to be something else. I mean, I think with social media right now, we all know it, right? There's a, snapback culture, and there's this perfection, and there's filters over everything. And as I say that, I mean, I've got the lights and all that kind of stuff to set up to put my best foot forward. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about showing up as real as I possibly can. And so a big part of that came certainly throughout my story, which we can, certainly dive into. But last year, when the world shut down, a relationship that I was in that I thought was like it, fell apart, and actually didn't even fall apart. I knew it needed to end, and so did he. And so we chose pretty powerfully to walk away. But that didn't take away any of the pain. And that grief, I think, combined with the changes in the world and just a culmination of factors, forced me into a time of healing, which I think I needed, and did for about the last 20 plus years or so.
Right.
Based on my story, at 17, I was sexually assaulted, and I never really took the time to deal with that. And because I never took the time to heal from that, I think because, in your youth, you don't necessarily know how to talk about those things. Maybe not even youth. They're hard to talk about anyway.
Right.
And so regardless of the circumstance, I didn't really take the time to heal, and life carried on, right? Because, there's still bills to pay. There are, right? Like, I had, was a guest on someone else's show, and they were saying, like, you seem to sort of move with your healing. And I was like, well, yeah, like I couldn't necessarily hit the pause button on my life, right? I was going to university and all this other stuff. And so I sort of limped along, finding healing over the last few years. And then finally, last year, had a chance to heal. And I spent about 14 weeks in deep healing, and then emerged and really had to reintroduce myself to myself,
Right.
and reintroduce myself to the world, which is sort of where I've come to today. And that was really when I started talking about the fullness of my story, which people who have known me for years are sort of like, I had no idea. And I mean, a lot of it for me was that it was wrapped up in guilt and shame. And I
Mhm.
think, whether it's the mom guilt, that certainly drove me and drives me. I mean, I was even watching like Home Alone the other day, which my daughter loves. She thinks it's hilarious. It's fun to watch. And she's 6, right? So she's just entertained by taking out these bad guys. But I was watching the mom and she's trying to get home, right? And she is
Right.
like riddled with mom guilt. Like it's hard for me to watch. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's
You
mom
can
guilt. That
imagine,
is like
no.
mom guilt right there. And I've been thinking a lot about that because it's so easy, especially as an entrepreneur. And certainly if I look at my own story, part of when I had kids, I didn't want mom guilt to be a thing. And I knew the only way it was not going to be a thing for me is if I prioritized myself. And maybe that means getting up half an hour earlier, which is hard to do because it seems like
Right.
kids know. They're like, they know,
It does
right?
give you a head
When you're
start
getting
though.
up.
It is.
Um,
Right.
yeah. So, but I know that the days that I do get up, and even if I just get 10 minutes to myself with a cup of coffee and some meditation or, a good personal development book, or just to sit and think about what is my intention for the day? What do I need to get done? Organize my list. By the time I hear the baby cry and my little one say, mommy cuddles, I'm good. And I'm like, I got this, right? I got the day by the tail.
Absolutely.
Yesterday it had me, but today, today I have it. So yeah.
I love that. Yes, it's so very true. Waking up and making sure that you're intentional about putting yourself first and knowing what it is that fills your bucket. So it sounds like you had, you said 14 months to work on yourself and your healing. And then it was almost like an unveiling to the world. Like, this is the new
Mm-hmm.
Candice. This
Mm-hmm.
is who I am. And which brings us to my next question is, you talk a lot about people pleasing.
I
And
do.
what role do you feel like, how do you feel you've changed and how have you been able to change? What steps do you feel that you took in order to make people pleasing not such a thing in your life? One of the concerns that I often hear from moms is that it's been so long since they've done something for themselves, they're not even sure what it is they'd like to do. They're so close to burning out that they're unsure where to even start to fill their bucket and reclaim themselves. Does this sound familiar? If so, I've developed a course just for you. It's called Self-Care 101, and for under $10, you can learn the basics of preventing complete burnout so that you too can rediscover who you are and discover what exactly fills you up. Self-care is way more than bubble baths and pedicures. For me, it doesn't even include those things. Discover what self-care means to you and how you can give your family the gift of a mom operating with a bucket that overflows. Visit www.momswithoutcapes.com/selfcare101 or check today's show notes for the link to enroll in Self-Care 101 and reclaim who you are under your mom hat.
Well, it's still a thing in my life, to be
Okay.
honest. I mean, like,
Then less
if
of a
you,
thing.
yeah, less of a thing. I think I should be honest about that because I think it's going to be an ongoing thing. Because the way I was raised, right? I was raised to be a good girl.
Mm-hmm.
Not a bad thing. My parents are amazing. But I was raised to be a good girl. That was how I survived in the world. And so, to put other people first, I think it's part of my nature as well, right? I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, which means I'm a helper. I like helping. I laugh at myself and say I'm a golden retriever. Like if there's a party, I just want to be there, right? I'm just happy to be included, which is great, but also means that I have a tendency to just naturally put my needs on the back burner. And then all of a sudden I wake up one day and I'm just mad because
Mm-hmm.
I
That
haven't
resentment.
prioritized myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning to not people please has been a big challenge. One of my dad's quotes, which I really love, but I've had to shift, was, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And I had to shift it because the etymology of the word nice is actually stupid. So I was a nice girl for a very long time, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I made some stupid choices. Didn't speak up for myself. That's why the assault happened. That's why some of the other narcissistic relationships happened, is I just didn't know how to say, this isn't good for me. without a reason. I felt like I always needed a reason to cancel or those kind of things, rather than now I've learned that no is a complete sentence.
Right.
And a large part of it is, I mean, I had kids and that helped. My daughter she's an extrovert. I am an introvert. So just dealing with her on a day-to-day challenges me on every single level I've got. Like if there's a button, she pushes it without even trying.
So you've had to learn
And
how to
I'm
say no out of necessity.
right. Yes.
Yeah, I
Oh
think
my
that
gosh.
goes
Yes.
moms.
Right. She's like, mom always says no. I'm like, no, always say no. But and
Right.
then how do I tell her, because I don't want to say, well, just be a good girl. I'm like, no, I don't want that either.
Mhm.
So we talk about being appropriate, right? We talk
Right.
about, and the other day we were talking and I said, you can say no to mommy.
Mhm.
I might still tell you why you need to honor my no, or I need to shift your no to another space, but you can say no to even mommy. And
Right.
she was like, I can. And I was like, yes. And
Right.
largely because I know that it's hard for me at 37 to say no. And
Right.
so I don't want to instill that thing in her. Right. So it's this weird concept. I'm like, but so I think it's this challenge, but how'd I go from people pleasing? I think I'm just aware of it now and I don't beat myself up over it. I acknowledge it about myself and I'm learning now. Even the other day, right? I had a brand new baby. People want to come and support and I appreciate that. But the best thing for me right now is just leave me alone, let me nap, let me do my thing. Um, and I'll tell you when I'm ready for visitors. And said to someone, why don't you come over tomorrow? And within an hour, I was like, I'm off. What's off? Right. And that's for
Mhm.
me, that's the niggle, right? That's my podcast, Trust and Niggle, Tell the Truth, which is listen to what's going on inside, tell the truth first to yourself, because then
Right.
you can decide what truth you're going to tell to the rest of the world. So I may not have to say to them, I'm just not feeling great today. I don't have to tell a story. I can just say, hey, which is what I did say. I said, hey, I may have spoken too soon.
Mhm.
Do you mind? Can I please make a different agreement? Can we talk about next weekend?
Right.
And generally people really appreciate when you show up with that authenticity. And so I've learned that even down to when I'm podcasting, if I wake up and I'm like, I am just not where I need to be today to serve the person who's coming on, the
Mhm.
old me would have really pushed myself to. And that's not to say I just up and cancel. I might do some self-care practices, some, yoga, meditation, whatever, to get myself in the mindset. But I have picked up the phone and said, hey, I am just not where I need to be to honor us communicating today. Can we reschedule? Is that at all possible? And 9 times out of 10, people respond with, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that. Another day would be better for me, which makes me glad
Yes.
that I trusted my niggle because they weren't listening to their own, right? To
Mhm.
call me up
Mhm.
and say the same thing. Or they just say, yeah, absolutely. How's this day?
Right. The
And
cooperative.
so I guess what I want to share with your listeners is that I'm a recovering people pleaser. I think I will
Mhm.
always be a recovering people pleaser. I'm just no longer beating myself up for it. And I'm learning how to communicate, even if I have to practice what I'm going to say a few times or remind myself that I don't have to say anything but no,
Right.
or can we make a different plan? There doesn't have to be anything more than that. And that in honoring myself, that's the best gift I can give to the world.
Right. Setting those boundaries, like learning how to, the difference between assertiveness and
Mhm.
aggressiveness and passivity, and being able to learn how to communicate assertively. And I like what you just said at the end about practicing, because it does take practice a lot of times. When my clients struggle with how to set certain boundaries
Mhm.
or how to say something that they want to say, because again, that resentfulness comes in, the resentment comes into play, and we work on, like, taking some steps back so that resentment doesn't happen. And we talk about writing it out. What are you going to say to that person? And really getting clear so that it's easier to communicate what it is, getting clear on what you want,
Mhm.
and then how exactly you're going to say it and present it to the person. And you're
Mhm.
right. In most cases, that person is just didn't want to speak up themselves and they were
Exactly.
thinking similar.
Yeah.
So awesome. Okay. So what do you see happening? Like when you started speaking up for yourself, or maybe in other moms when they begin speaking up for themselves, and what do you see happening? What are the benefits of doing so?
Relief. And for me, anxiety plagued my life, and it came on as I got older. And for me, the anxiety feeling is that I'm out of tune with my own integrity. And people throw around the word integrity all the time. Like, they don't have integrity. And I'm like, well, integrity is an internal thing.
Mhm.
So if I'm out of sync with myself, whether it's a value or I'm not putting myself first, or I said yes when I should have said no, or said no when I should have said yes, then that's when the anxiety shows up. And so for me, it's about relief. It's about being able to live, free of the mental clutter. It's about being able to do that. And I mean, it was even like today, I woke up and I was just plagued by anxiety. And the first thing I do is sit down with a cup of coffee and write out what it is that's rolling around in my brain, because it's not always immediately apparent to me
Mhm.
what's out of sync. Right. It's where did that happen? When did this come on? I don't know. Sometime yesterday. Right. And so
Mhm.
I like sharing that with other women too, because I'm like, listen, I don't know. I can't always pinpoint it. I sometimes have to sit for a minute and be like, oh, I'm out of sync because I didn't step up for myself and say, hey, this isn't working for me. Right. And right now, obviously we have a new baby in the house. So there's lots of adjustments and changes. And it's tough for me sometimes to not just assume the mom role
Mhm.
and immediately, go into work mode. I have a very supportive partner who's at home, but he's used to working. He's on paternity leave and I'm still working because
Right.
I'm an entrepreneur. And so we're shifting roles a bit and we're having to be really honest, like, okay, how does this, and we're loving the challenge, but it is a challenge. Like, okay, like, I need to express a need or a concern here. And that's been really, really, really powerful. So for me, it's about the feeling of relief, which I tell other women to look for, that it's not sunshine, lollipops, and roses. Usually when you get a niggle and you're out of sync with yourself, there is a tough conversation that's going to require you to have some courage,
Mhm.
to speak up for yourself.
Right.
Those are not always easy.
Right. Right.
Even with people you love and care about, who are going to support whatever you have to say.
Sometimes it's
Um,
harder to
I
have it
think
with the
so,
people that
right?
you're in a
I'm
relationship
like,
with.
I
Yes.
really love all of these things you're doing, but this little thing is still like, this is out of sync. And so I really push women to that, because once they can learn to feel that little lift of relief, they can chase that feeling. And for me, it went from the push that was always my life before I recentered and gave myself some grace and some allowance and all that kind of stuff, to now it's a pull, and I'm like, that's better. That direction is the right direction. And by the end of the day, we'll have a different plan set. And it's interesting how I feel very scattered up here. I'm very creative, so that makes sense, right? It kind of rattles
Mhm.
around.
Yeah.
But the second I get that feeling of relief, I'm like, oh, there it is. And then instantly there's usually we could do this would work. And it's almost as if it frees up solutions and possibilities, which I love living in. I love living in possibility. It didn't solve the problem immediately, but that's a direction we can go.
Right. It opened up the possibilities.
Mhm.
That sounds like that feeling of relief is a positive reinforcement
Mhm.
where you're like, I want more of that.
Yes,
And then
more of that, please.
how can I repeat? And that takes self-reflection to know, like,
Yes.
well, what worked? What
Mhm.
what did I just do that created that feeling of relief? And how can I replicate it and duplicate and keep going with it to
Mhm.
be able to create more momentum?
Yep. Yep.
Absolutely. So what is your favorite way of practicing self-care? You mentioned quite a few during our
Mhm.
conversation of things that you do, like the waking up early, and it sounds like you do some journaling and some reading and a lot of self-discovery activities and exercises. So what are a few, let's just say, what are a few, or what's your favorite way to practice?
Well, I mean, I often say on my podcast that, self-care is not about bubble baths, although it can be, right?
Right.
Because for me, in the beginning, when I was embracing this, that felt very woo-woo, right?
Yeah.
Um, like it's just a bubble bath, but sometimes that's
Like
an amazing thing,
indulgent. Yeah.
right? Yeah, exactly. Um, for me, it's about stopping the thinking. So whether that's journaling, sometimes it's meditation. That's a habit I'm learning to embrace. Um, Also because the monkey mind's always going. So, it's
Mhm.
taken me a long time to just let the thoughts go
Right.
and
Right.
realize that that's meditation too. Backcountry camping was something I discovered last year during my healing. That it was really great to just disappear and be like, I couldn't
Off the
access
grid.
anything. Yeah. Hiking 32 kilometers in a day is a great way to reconnect with yourself, right? You feel your feet by the end of the day, you feel your back by the end
Mhm.
of the day. But I think um, for me, that's probably the number one for me, is just disappearing into the mountains for a couple of reasons. One, I've always enjoyed the expansive feeling I feel when I look at the mountains. I feel like Yes. I like how it feels when I tackle something hard physically, whether it's a long walk or 42K or whatever it is. I feel empowered, and that
Mhm.
invariably transfers into, I tend to work a lot without any physical activity. I think a lot of us do.
Right.
And so it's sort of if I can do that, I can definitely do whatever else is in front of me. And I often feel like I need to be readily available for my team or for the people I'm working with, and for I feel responsible, right?
Right.
To live well and to respond. And so when I disappear and I can't be reached, that's a freedom for me to not be
Mhm.
accessible. And that's something I'm still learning, to put boundaries and not feel like I need to check emails all the time, right?
Right. Right.
So ongoing. Some days are great, some days I'm like, so that's amazing.
You're a work in progress. We
I'm
all.
definitely
We
a work in
all.
progress, right? And some days like yesterday, I was like, I am on top of the world. And then I woke up this morning, I'm like, where did the anxiety come from? Like yesterday was so good. What happened? Um, and so that's one. Journaling is definitely another one, mostly because I can't always be honest as I'd like to be. I love these people.
Mhm.
I'm sure you know them.
Right.
They say whatever's on their mind. I'm like, how do you do that? Like, how do you unleash like that?
Right.
But
Right.
I'm too worried about it coming back. Like, I'm like, whoo, if I say something like that, I'll get, struck by a car
Right.
later, like for sure.
The
That
karma.
sort of thing.
Right.
So in my journal, I can say whatever I want to say, and that feels
And
really
it's safe.
good.
Yes.
hmm And then if I really don't want to leave it in there, I can rip it out and burn it, right? Or hide
Mhm.
it and be like, cancel,
Mhm.
cancel, delete, delete, right? Don't even want to leave that stuff written down. Or I can like go, okay, now I can think, clearly through that.
Process it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think those are my top two favorites. And then just acknowledging that sometimes just a drive and getting a cup of coffee is a great act of self-care. And it's
Yeah.
usually for me breaking the habit of overthinking, which then leads to an anxiety and not being present. And I find that when I'm not present,
Mhm.
um, that leads to me often stepping out of integrity without meaning to, right? Because I'm just sort of
Right.
living it.
Right.
And so, I mean, self-care can be as simple as mommy needs to go to the bathroom. I'm locking the door. I might be
Knowing
5 minutes,
need.
right? I just need to sit here and breathe for a minute.
Yep.
And then I will
Need
come
to
back
hear
out.
my thoughts.
Right? Yes. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So the first key is just knowing what you need and then knowing how to ask for it and then how to
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
So yes. Listen to this short message, but stay tuned to learn what book has profoundly impacted Candice's life. Hey, Mom, can't catch a good night's sleep these days? I've got you. Sleep matters. And because it does, not getting the quantity or the quality you need can have detrimental effects on your health and well being. To feel your best and not only to get through the day, but to have an absolutely amazing day, you've got to get the sleep your body and mind needs, which is why I developed Sleep Matters, a course for moms to help you take care of yourself and get the kind of sleep you deserve. In this course, I teach you cognitive and behavioral strategies used in the treatment of insomnia. We work to minimize the sleep worries, reequate your bed with sleep, set you up with a sound nighttime routine, and establish an environment that is conducive to sleep. Don't waste another night tossing and turning. Enroll in Sleep Matters, self-care for the troubled sleeper. And finally, get your Z's. So part of my membership, I do an unstoppable self-growth book group, and we focus on self-development and like in the self-care arena, the genre, and come and we have discussion questions and all that. So I love adding to the list of potential books. So what is your favorite self-development book, or what book has profoundly changed your life?
The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murray.
Okay.
As you can see, and I mean, if they're looking on the screen,
Yours is very it's very well loved.
It's well loved, and it's been written in. I think books are friends, like shoes. Shoes and books are very good friends. Keep them close. Yeah. Mostly because it's bite-sized pieces, and I'm often surprised at the power of my own thinking, my subconscious mind. And I mean, I'm a manifester, so I do believe that my thoughts become things. And I'm very aware of that. I mean, yesterday, uh, case in point, I'm working on some big, hairy, audacious goals. I've been thinking about them, been like, how would I live if I doing all that work around manifestation, right?
Visualization.
And I was emptying out the coffee grinds from the coffee maker.
Mhm.
And I picked it up and it was really full because we visited my parents. And so I was like, this would really suck if it broke. Guess what happened? Like the next second, it broke. And I was like, oh my God. Right. And I was reminded again. And I mean, I didn't miss the cue from the universe, which was your thoughts are really powerful. And I remember thinking, as I was thinking, this would suck if it broke. And I was like, oh, I shouldn't think that. And it like just
It was in that instance. Yeah.
right. And so I think about those kinds of things. And there are one of my favorite reasons why I encourage somebody to buy it is it's a really easy read. You can leave it by the bed. It's a small enough book. I usually put mine in my backpack or my purse or now my diaper bag so that I never waste time. If I have, 5 minutes to myself waiting for somebody, I can read it. It doesn't need to be read and probably shouldn't be read in one whole sitting. It's a book that you basically have on your bedside table that you are constantly flipping through when you need to recenter and ground. And the author takes time to write out affirmations that you can say, because sometimes I think we don't know what to say to begin to shift the mindset. So like he'll say, just say the word wealth or success or my sales are improving every day. And there's one in there, which is one of my favorites, which is about how to attract the partner you want into your life. And every time I've used it a few times, I've had a few relationships, I've had the book a few years. But every time I've said it, the next person I attract is I'm like, ooh, good, right? Yeah. Even if it was this or better, right? If we made a shift and, moved on to the next, powerful relationship. But I love sharing that with other women who are maybe like, I can't seem to meet the right guy. And I'm like, well, you got to stop saying that. Here's something you could say instead of it, right down to infinite intelligent leads and guides in all ways. And I'm like, oh, right. Like it gives me that feeling of relief that sometimes I need and I can't find. Right. And so I'll often just sit down and open it to whatever page. And 9 times out of 10, it's like, oh, I needed that today. So that's one I highly recommend.
And I love that it's bite-sized pieces because as moms, we don't have the time to read books cover to cover. So being able to have kind of like a handbook to refer to. Sounds like it would be awesome. So, okay. So I wrote it down. I'm going to add it to the list. So now where can people find you, Candice?
Well, they can find me on Instagram for sure. I'm there under Candice Creation, and Candice is with an I. So CANDICE and then just creation. And then once they find me there, I'm hooked up. I've also got Single Mama Success Club. So I talk about being a single mom and how I've moved my life to where it is today. I'm in a great relationship. I still align to a single mom because at the end of the day, the buck stops right here. And I think as moms, there's a powerful piece of that. And then of course my website, which is just CandiceSmiley.com. Smiley is my last name, so it's pretty easy to find. And again, I try to make it so that once you find me in one place, everything leads to the rest of it. So they can find the podcast archives, they can find links to, what I'm up to. And I'm open to connecting because I love that. Conversations are magic for sure.
For your thing. So I am going to, for all of you listeners who want to get in touch with Candice, check out the show notes. I'll put all of her social links and information in the show notes for you. And again, thank you, Candice, so much. You provided so much value today, and I loved our conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved being here.
Hey, did you know that there's a Facebook group filled with moms without capes? Women who are learning that it's safe to take off the Superwoman cape and take care of themselves? There sure is, and we'd love to have you in the group. Moms Without Capes is a free community for moms who feel overwhelmed, stressed out, and exhausted from trying to do it all. Come discover who you are under that cape and give yourself permission to show yourself some love. Search Moms Without Capes when you're in Facebook or follow the link in the show notes of this podcast episode. See you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Moms Without Capes podcast. I'm always up to hearing your ideas for future episodes, so send me a DM and let me know. And if you enjoyed today's episode, it would be awesome if you'd leave me a positive review wherever you're listening to podcasts these days. days. Until next time, take care of you. You are worth it.